Good afternoon.
Shantona Chaudhary, lead counsel for the commission. Our witness this afternoon is Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Can I ask that the witness be sworn or affirmed?
Do you wish to be sworn or affirmed for the record?
Sworn, please.
Would you please state your name for the record?
Justin Trudeau.
And do you swear that the testimony you're about to give today is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you very much. Counsel, you may proceed.
Thank you. So, Prime Minister, we'll start with the typical routine housekeeping. Mr. Clerk, can I ask you to pull up WIT 66, please? Prime Minister, you'll recall being interviewed by Commission Counsel on February 27th, 2024?
Yes.
Can you confirm that you've reviewed the summary of that interview, that the summary is accurate, and that you adopt it as part of your evidence before the Commission?
I can.
Thank you. The next is WIT 67, please, Mr. Clerk. So, Mr. Prime Minister, this is the summary of your in-camera examination. You'll recall having been examined in camera by Commission Counsel earlier this year?
Yes, I do.
Okay, and once again, can you confirm that you've reviewed the summary, that the summary is accurate, and that you adopt it as part of your evidence for the Commission?
I can.
Perfect. We can take that down now, Mr. Clerk. So I'm going to ask you to start today, Prime Minister, by asking a pretty general question, but nevertheless a fundamental one, which is, having been Prime Minister now since 2015, can you paint for the Commission a picture of the foreign interference landscape over your tenure as Prime Minister? And before you answer, I'll just put two sort of precisions on that. One is that we know foreign interference comes in all shapes and sizes, but the kind of foreign interference that interests us most today at this commission is obviously foreign interference in democratic processes and electoral processes and institutions. Second, it goes without saying, but in answering this question and all questions I pose to you, please stick to information that can be safely publicly disclosed.
Indeed. One of the things that we had grown concerned about as a party when we were in opposition before the 2015 election was the lack of oversight by parliamentarians into what was going on in our national security universe in this country. The example of the Afghan detainee documents, where there wasn't a process whereby parliamentarians of different parties, of opposition parties, could examine top secret material, was seen as a lacking that Canada had, certainly compared to our other Five Eyes partners, which is why in our 2015 campaign platform, we committed to creating a National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians, whereby parliamentarians of all different parties would be sworn into the highest levels of clearance to be able to oversee, verify, and ascertain that everything that our national security agencies were doing was, on the one hand, compliant with Canadian values, rules, and the Charter, and on the other hand, doing everything necessary to keep Canadians safe. So we started in 2015 with a commitment to strengthen our national security institutions. We did that by the creation of National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians. We also combined a number of oversight organizations into NCIRA, which is a more judicial or academic or high-level oversight of our national security agencies, as well as, as we began to govern, strengthened our various national security and intelligence agencies and tools. One of the things I did is I changed our national security advisor to a national security and intelligence advisor, because it's not just about security, and obviously the work around intelligence was getting more and more complex and important in part of keeping Canadians safe. Over the course of that first mandate, we witnessed the significant foreign interference allegations or threats during the 2016 presidential election in the United States, where Russia, certainly through misinformation and disinformation online, attempted to interfere. But also, more interestingly, as a key example, in 2017, during the French presidential election, there was actually a moment in which officials within the French governmental apparatus actually had to come out and tell the citizens of France that a particular piece of information or news that was about to break was in fact Russian disinformation and should not be given any weight or heed. That got us to reflecting on whether or not Canada had a potential to intercede in an election campaign if there was a significant threat of foreign interference impacting the ability of our elections to actually unfold in a free and fair way. So we got to work on developing such a mechanism here in Canada, which ended up being two mechanisms, both the site panel, the site task force that allows our security agencies to monitor very closely the goings-on in the election, and the panel of five, which is top civil servants who would have the ability, if they deemed it necessary, to actually go public or take other actions to ensure the protection of our democratic institutions and electoral processes from foreign interference. One of the other examples of things that we did during that time in 2018, when Canada hosted the G7 leaders meeting in Charlevoix, Quebec, we actually brought forward and created the G7 Rapid Response Mechanism, which was designed to monitor and respond to threats of misinformation and disinformation in our democracies, a tool that has been successfully used over the past years since in a number of different occasions, and indeed was more recently actually strengthened to weigh in a little more on the democracies in Eastern Europe, where we're seeing significant interference by Russians, given the conflict in Ukraine.
Okay, thank you for that summary. What I'm going to try and get at now is the threats, really, to which all of this responds. So we heard from Minister Gould this morning about the plan to protect Canada's democracy and what it was really designed to do, that process. Mr. Clerk, I'm going to ask you to pull up a document, CAN 019496. So, Mr. Prime Minister, this is a document actually from 2017, so before this commission's mandate per se, but it gives an idea, I think, of the kind of information, or at least that was available to you at that time, and that's what I'm going to bring out here. So, this is a memo that was written to you by David Morrison, your NSIA at the time, and you received it in June 2017. So the top of that document there talks about the Chinese foreign interference threat, and it says, the CSIS describes the PRC essentially as sophisticated, pervasive, persistent. There are other countries around, but the PRC is the big one. Mr. Clerk, if you can just scroll down a little bit more. Okay, scroll down, I'll tell you when to stop. Keep going. Okay, there we go. So on the third page here, you'll see Prime Minister, it talks about allies who are facing similar challenges and refers specifically to Australia, in which I believe what's explained there is in Australia, it was found that agents of the Chinese government were donating millions of dollars across the political spectrum. So your NSIA is informing you of this, and keep scrolling down, please, Mr. Clerk, to the next page, and then brings it back to Canada. Scroll down a little bit more, please, Mr. Clerk, till the next page. BCO comments. There we go. Okay, last page. Politicians and elected officials, in particular at the provincial, territorial, and municipal levels, are largely unaware of the PRC's and others' efforts to influence Canada's political landscape, making them more vulnerable to these attempts, either in Canada or when traveling abroad. So there's that, and then scroll down just a little bit more, Mr. Clerk, so we can see the last part of this. So this is, I'm sorry, I said it was David Morrison, it's actually Danielle Jean. This is a very sensitive issue, and public efforts to raise awareness should remain general and not single out specific countries to avoid potential bilateral incidents. However, countries across the line should be reminded of appropriate conduct and risk of consequences. So, Mr. Prime Minister, I'd like you to speak to those points if you can. First of all, the level of knowledge about foreign interference, the level of threat, here we see it coming from the PRC, and also that tension between sort of exposing something about foreign interference while at the same time having to balance international relations, bilateral incidents, and the like.
Well, first of all, it's a good example, as I spoke about the experiences in the United States and in France. The experience that Australia had, not with Russia, but with China, is another excellent example that we were very aware of at the time. And highlighted the fact that there are foreign state actors who are interested in playing a role in our democracies or in disrupting our democracies. The difference between Russia and China is a significant one in that China has a very large diaspora of Chinese Canadians who are often the first targets of interference efforts by a foreign state, by that foreign state. So we were very aware of it. As a politician in Canada for 8 years when I became Prime Minister, I was certainly aware of the various ways officials and different countries, particularly through diasporas, can take an interest in Canadian political processes. But to understand it better, one of the first things we did in 2015, maybe into 2016, was request a briefing from our national security officials that would go at some of the things we had heard, some of the things we knew or understood as opposition politicians now in a position of being in government, that we wanted to understand more about the role of foreign interference in particular communities, and we even wanted to know about particular individuals that we had heard things about, and understand what landscape we were actually walking into, because we suddenly had access to a very sophisticated and excellent national security apparatus that when one is a simple opposition politician, you don't have access to. So from the very beginning, we knew there were things we needed to know about. And we got briefings on that, and this 2017 memo is certainly a continuation of that level of awareness. The issue of it being a sensitive issue is quite germane, and it evolves over time. Back in the early days of our government, we were very much looking to deepen the trade and commercial ties with China, seeing it as an opportunity for exports. One of my biggest files of the day on that was trying to restore the canola shipments that many Western grain farmers were relying on, that were seeing irregular blockages from the Chinese authorities. So that was part of our work. But even as we were doing that, we were very aware of the areas in which we needed to challenge or contest China, whether it was on issues of human rights or democracy, of Uyghurs, of protection of the rights of our diaspora communities from influence or intimidation. There's always been a complex approach that every government has had to take with China. Over the years, however, this has shifted significantly. As I'm sure we'll get into, the relations with China took a significant turn when they chose to arbitrarily detain 2 Canadian citizens. And for close to 3 years, we were not just pushing back hard against China on the arbitrary nature of those detentions and the fact that they needed to release those 2 Canadians, but we were extremely active around the world in mobilizing other countries to bring up Canada and the plight of the two Michaels during their bilateral conversations, which was something I can say ended up putting a significant amount of strain on our relationship because it was a massive irritant to China that everyone kept talking about these two Michaels even when they didn't have anything to do with Canada. We heard it regularly, but that was what we would continue to do. It perhaps came to the greatest sort of head in terms of being reminded of appropriate conduct and risk of consequences in November of 2022 when I was in Indonesia for a G20 meeting when I saw the president of China, Xi Jinping, at the opening ceremonies. I mentioned to him that I needed China to stop interfering in Canadian democratic processes, because that was very much something that people were very concerned about back home at that particular moment.
Okay. We'll move then to from the general landscape, which we now I think have a decent picture of, to some more precise questions having to do with this Commission's terms of reference. Et je vais commencer en français, monsieur, maintenant. Et on m'a parlé d'un sujet qui est couvert dans votre résumé d'entrevue et votre témoignage. C'est la manière dont vous recevez de l'information et du renseignement. Un point clé qui ressort de votre entrevue et de votre témoignage auparavant, c'est que les documents écrits sont peut-être pas la manière principale dont vous recevez ces informations-là. Et c'est plutôt les briefages verbaux que vous recevez la plupart de votre information. Alors, est-ce que vous pouvez nous expliquer ça et nous expliquer de façon générale la manière dont on vous fournit les informations dont vous avez besoin?
Tout d'abord, tout premier ministre reçoit énormément de briefages et d'informations, pas seulement sur l'ingérence étrangère ou des situations de sécurité nationale, mais sur comment fonctionne l'économie, quels sont les enjeux au niveau de la sécurité publique, quelles sont les préoccupations qu'on a avec nos alliés. Je suis constamment en mode de recevoir de l'information d'énormément différents départements et conseillers à travers le gouvernement. Je suis aussi les nouvelles principales pour être à l'affût de ce que les Canadiens voient dans leur jour à jour, quelles sont les préoccupations des Canadiens dans leur vie quotidienne. Tout ça est présenté de différentes façons, mais malgré le fait que je reçois de l'information écrite, des sommaires de la semaine, des documents en matière de sécurité et de renseignement, qui sont souvent très FYI, très pour votre information. La seule façon sûre de s'assurer que je suis informé d'un enjeu prioritaire, c'est jamais juste de me glisser une note que peut-être je lirai, peut-être que je n'aurai pas le temps de lire si je suis en déplacement, si j'ai un horaire très chargé. C'est d'assurer d'avoir un moment de briefage direct avec ma conseillère en sécurité et renseignement, c'est-à-dire la NSIA, qui vient me donner des mises à jour sécuritaires, d'habitude sur plusieurs sujets pendant une même séance, de façon assez régulière, des fois 1 ou 2 fois par semaine, plus si nécessaire, des fois juste 3 ou 4 fois par mois. Ça dépend, mais la seule façon de garantir ou de s'assurer que je reçois les informations nécessaires, c'est de me donner un briefing en personne ou au téléphone sécurisé si nécessaire sur un enjeu quelconque ou prioritaire.
OK. Et vous avez mentionné, bien sûr, la conseillère principale NSIA. L'acronyme m'échappe quand même, mais la NSIA. Est-ce que c'est vraiment la NSIA dont vous dépendez le plus pour vous fournir les informations dont vous avez besoin dans ce domaine, ou c'est la greffière, ou c'est un peu les deux?
Dans ce domaine-là, c'est la responsabilité de la NSIA de me garder à l'affût de tout ce que j'ai de besoin et quand j'ai des questions en lien avec la sécurité ou les renseignements, c'est directement vers elle que je me tourne pour avoir des réponses à mes questions. Le greffier, la greffière, a souvent un rôle à jouer pour me souligner des enjeux très importants qui peuvent être des enjeux de sécurité ou de renseignement. Mais c'est principalement la NSIA qui est chargée de me garder à l'affût sur les enjeux de sécurité et de renseignement.
OK. Et lorsqu'on vous fournit ces informations-là, je vais vous demander de nous expliquer un peu votre réaction et de façon assez précise, parce que nous avons entendu votre Chief of Staff, Mme Telford, hier, votre chef de cabinet, témoigner qu'elle a mentionné qu'elle lit les produits de renseignement ou qu'elle reçoit ces informations-là, parfois avec certaines réserves, sans les prendre nécessairement au pied de la lettre, parce que ça contient parfois des erreurs, c'est pas tout à fait juste. Et j'aimerais savoir votre perspective ou votre expérience à ce sujet-là.
Il y a un principe en politique, surtout pour ceux qui sont en train de donner des notes d'information ou des briefages au ministre ou au premier ministre, que si vous n'êtes pas certain de ce que vous dites, vous ne devriez peut-être pas le dire. De mettre des faits erronés dans la tête d'un ministre ou d'un premier ministre avant qu'il sorte parler aux médias ou se lever dans la Chambre, ça peut être extrêmement problématique. Alors, quand on me donne des informations sur un incident qui s'est produit ou une préoccupation quelconque ou un désastre naturel ou une situation auquel font face les Canadiens, c'est sûr que la véracité de l'information et le fait que ce soit de l'information le plus complète possible est extrêmement importante. Mais je ferai un peu une exception par rapport à l'intelligence. Parce que quand on a des renseignements ou de l'intelligence, c'est pas toujours certain, c'est pas toujours corroboré. Dans les milieux juridique, c'est bien connu que la différence entre ce qui est intelligence et ce qu'on peut montrer en évidence est une grosse distinction. Alors, pour moi, quand je me fais briefer par écrit ou plus souvent de façon verbale par les agents de renseignement, la conversation sur la fiabilité de l'information fait partie intégrale de ce qu'on est en train de dire. Par exemple, j'ai été briefé sur le fait que l'Iran avait tiré sur l'avion ukrainien contenant une centaine de Canadiens. Les premiers rapports étaient un peu plus flous, mais ils ont dit on a des indications que ceci, cela. Et rendu au troisième briefage que j'ai eu là-dessus, ils ont pu être très, très précis que oui, on sait que c'est les forces armées iraniennes qui ont abattu l'avion ukrainien. Mais ce que je dis, c'est qu'on doit toujours prendre les renseignements et l'intelligence, les documents d'intelligence avec une certaine conscience que c'est à confirmer, ou c'est peut-être pas 100% exact, mais parce que c'est de l'information extrêmement sensible, ça peut être très, très utile pour nous indiquer, par exemple, que la Russie est peut-être à veille d'envahir l'Ukraine. On agit, on prend les informations au niveau du renseignement différemment que la façon que je prends un rapport sur le taux de chômage au Canada ou le niveau d'inflation. Donc, il y a toujours un certain niveau, pas de sceptisme, mais de pensée critique qui doit s'appliquer à toute information recueillie par nos services de renseignement et d'information.
We'll probably come back to some of that as we go along. I'm going to take you to the 2019 election now specifically. Mr. Clerk, can you pull up CAN 005461, please? So, Prime Minister, this is, while it's getting pulled up, yep, there it is. We know at this point in the evidence before the commission that on September 28th, 2019, the Site Task Force and CSIS gave a briefing to the security cleared representative of the Liberal Party about foreign interference in the Don Valley North riding. We also know from Mr. Broadhurst that he then received that information. How did this play out from your perspective?
Late in September, as I was coming through Ottawa, I believe I was on my way out across the country for another stretch of campaigning. I believe it was on a Sunday as I was heading out after Saturday with my family. Mr. Broadhurst met me at the airport in a holding room, in a lounge on the government side of the airport, government terminal in the airport, to let me know of concerns that he had received from the Site Task Force and CSIS about the nomination campaign, the nomination election, the nomination race contest in Don Valley North. He shared with me that intelligence services had shared with him concerns that Chinese officials in Canada had been developing plans to possibly engage in interference in the nomination contest, specifically by mobilizing buses filled with, and the challenge in this is always trying to pick out what I heard exactly then from what I knew later, but I believe it was either buses full of students or buses filled with Chinese speakers or Chinese diaspora members who would be mobilized to support Han Dong, who would have been mobilized to support Han Dong in that nomination contest of a few weeks previous. In what ended up being probably a 20-minute to half-hour conversation with Mr. Broadhurst, I asked him more specifically about, okay, so they had plans or an intent or a capacity to do this. Do we know that they did? Did you hear from CSIS and the security agencies that this was actually done? They weren't entirely certain. There was reasons to believe that perhaps it has, and perhaps the indication was that there were buses filled with Chinese speakers at that nomination contest. I asked if, and as a matter of course, those who are in politics and certainly on the ground riding politics know that it is regular for buses to be mobilized, particularly in contested nominations of community organizations, student groups, a particular seniors residence could bring a minibus full of seniors to participate in a nomination contest. So just the existence of buses wasn't enough, buses with Chinese speakers or Mandarin speakers in them wasn't enough to be itself alarming, or a condemnation, but there were clear indications that there were concerns by CSIS that China might have been behind this, and that those students or those individuals on the bus might have been motivated or mobilized to vote in that way, and there were concerns that CSIS had. I asked the extent to which they were certain that it happened, the extent to which they were certain that China was indeed behind the mobilizing of the bus or buses. And I also asked whether or not CSIS had information that Han Dong knew about this, whether he was witting and aware that China had mobilized, or Chinese officials had mobilized buses for him or not. And the answers were not clear from CSIS at that point, according to what Mr. Broadhurst told me. I then I also asked if it was a close nomination, if there was a sense that the actual result of the nomination could have been affected by this bus or buses or what was there, and that wasn't clear at all. CSIS didn't have any conclusions to share at that point. I asked Mr. Broadhurst whether CSIS was making any recommendations or suggestions as to what we should do with this information. And it was clear to Mr. Broadhurst that this was very much about just letting us know so that we know and could perhaps take any actions that we deemed appropriate, but they weren't going to be recommending for us to take action of one way or another. But they also specified that this was secret information that we could not share with the candidate in question, Mr. Dong, or the public at large in terms of what they were telling us about these concerns and these allegations. I then asked Mr. Broadhurst what the Liberal Party processes that are in place to oversee nominations, particularly contested nominations, had flagged around that nomination contest of a few weeks before. There are party officials that oversee the voting, the registrations, the voting, the processes, the counting. There are lawyers in place overseeing the count. There are possibilities for the losing contestant or contestants to challenge the result if they feel it was unfair. There are many processes because political parties often have some very complex fights around nomination parties, all nomination contests. All political parties are like that. And Mr. Broadhurst assured me that they had looked into, when they heard these allegations or this information from CSIS and CITE, and had no flags on the nomination process. So then I had what was a brief conversation with Mr. Broadhurst after we had established all that, to sort of agree that the threshold for overturning a democratic event like an official party nomination to find out who would be the candidate for a general election, particularly during an general election, must have a fairly high threshold for removal of that candidate. And that was really sort of the binary choice we were placed with in that situation. Acting would be removing Han Dong as our official candidate. The other choice would be not to remove that candidate. But even not having removed that candidate, it would be something, given this information, that we would have to revisit. Certainly in the case that that candidate got elected, there would be questions we would have to follow up on after the election to properly understand what happened and what the issues or the risks were in this situation. But understanding that the decision to remove someone needed a high threshold, a threshold that, incidentally, I have met and seen many other cases. As Liberal Party leader, I have on many, many different occasions had to ask people to step down or step away or desist as candidates for the Liberal Party. As most recently as the last election where we did that in the case of a downtown Toronto riding. But in this case, I didn't feel that there was sufficient or sufficiently credible information that would justify this very significant step as to remove a candidate in these circumstances.
So where does that leave you? So you don't exercise that option, and you put it as a pretty binary choice there. But you have this information, you receive this information, it's, as you say, classified information that you can't share. What are you able to do? Where does this leave a political party receiving this information?
Well, it meant that after the election, when we were out of caretaker period, where I went back to being primarily Prime Minister and not simply leader of a political party with 338 candidates across the country, I was able to turn to our intelligence agencies and say, we need to know more about this. We need to understand what the context is, because the answers that we get on that will have a bearing on choices we could make in the future about different roles or responsibilities for an individual in such a situation.
Okay. Going to move on to some other things now because we have a lot to cover in 75 minutes. Je vois le temps qui coule. Okay, so the next topic then, Mr. Clerk, you can pull this up, CAN 003116, but Prime Minister, I think I can ask you this question without reference to a document. An incident that was reported by the RRM in the 29 election had to do with an article published in the Buffalo Chronicle, some misinformation, false information about you specifically. Is that something that came to your attention in the 2019 election?
No, it did not.
No, it did not. Okay.
Sorry, the engagement of the site task force or the panel or anyone into that issue was not something I was aware of at the time. I was, of course, aware of the quite disgusting false conspiracies or allegations being shared by both the Buffalo Chronicle and a significant number of conservative politicians.
Okay, so you were aware of the article, but not how, let's say, the apparatus was dealing with it.
I may have been aware of the article. I was certainly aware of the allegations and the accusations that were heinous and untrue in that.
Okay. I think that's probably what we'll cover for 2019, although I do want to pull up CAN 015487, please. So, Prime Minister, this is the memo from David Morrison. I misspoke earlier. This is January 14th, 2020, I think, when you received this. And it's essentially a report on the 2019 election, not on the outcome of the election, but on the operation of the site task force and the panel. Mr. Clerk, can you scroll down to the third bullet, please?
Actually, could I just quickly look at the box? Yeah, sorry. Yeah, the third bullet. Yes, that's fine.
Okay, so what they say here is pre-election intel briefings and monitoring provided a baseline assessment, suggesting that foreign interference would be commensurate to overall interference campaigns. While some instances were noted and some TRM as a threat reduction measure were taken, none of these activities met the threshold. And then, Mr. Clerk, can you keep scrolling down? Next page. Keep going. I'll tell you when to stop. Nope, I think we may, oh, no, there we go. Okay. It says, as it pertains to FI and as referenced above, despite concerns that Canada would be targeted, and then I'm going to go through this quite quickly, but the assessment is there was no foreign cyber threat activity targeting Elections Canada, no instances of foreign interference in the human space, no significant indications of FI in the digital information ecosystem. And then what Mr. Morrison says is arguably this places the level of FI and GE 2019 below the anticipated baseline. Is that consistent with the information that was being provided to you about what happened in GE 2019?
Yes, this was a report in January of 2020, so 3 months after the election. I would have already have been briefed multiple times by the clerk and by others that their conclusion was that the elections in 2019 were indeed free and fair, and the outcome was not affected by foreign interference, either overall or in the specific riding contests.
Okay, so now let's leave 2019 and move to the 2021 election. I'm going to ask you about a series of some incidents or events about which the Commission has received information. And I'll do the first one with reference to one of the topical summaries that's been produced to the Commission by the government. So, Mr. Clerk, that's Can Sum 4. The title of this one is a bit of a tongue twister, but Possible People's Republic of China Foreign Interference Related Mis- or Disinformation. So what we have here, if you can scroll down past the caveat page, Mr. Clerk, is a summary of essentially allegations of misinformation about the Conservative Party, its leader Aaron O'Toole, and I think Kenny Chu was in there as well, that were circulating during the 2021 election. So my question to you, Prime Minister, is this something that you were aware of as it was occurring in 2021?
During the 2021 election, no. Shortly after the 2021 election, when the Conservative Party went public with its concerns in the sort of the week that followed, I learned about it through media reports.
Okay. And were you aware that the Conservative Party had raised those concerns with the government as well?
Not at the time, but later I would learn that through briefings.
Okay.
Months later.
The next one then is, where is the next one? Can Sum 13, please, Mr. Clerk? So this is actually a summary about both 2019 and 2021. The more germane one, maybe 2021. Can you scroll down to the information page? Thank you, Mr. Clerk. So what this summarizes, you'll see, is expressions of partisan preferences by certain PRC officials in Canada. And what it says about 2019 is that there was reporting that some PRC officials expressed political preferences which were party agnostic and opportunistic at a riding level. So then scrolling down, please, again, Mr. Clerk. In 2021, there was reporting that some individual PRC officials in Canada made comments expressing a preference for a Liberal Party minority government. The rationale was they don't perceive any of the political parties as being particularly pro-China, but perceived minority governments as being more limited in terms of enacting anti-China policies. So this reporting of an expressed preference by certain PRC officials for a Liberal minority, was that something of which you were aware at the time?
No. As I said, both the 2019 and 2021 elections happened in a context of significant tensions between our government and the government of the People's Republic of China, particularly over the illegal and arbitrary detention of 2 Canadian citizens, the 2 Michaels. We were extremely active both in pushing back at Chinese officials on this issue, but also, as I said, active around the world in drumming up support for people, for different countries, for the 2 Michaels, but also support for an initiative we were taking around arbitrary detention and how it shouldn't be used as a tool of political pressure or achieving political goals. So, I can certainly say that while individual officials may well have expressed a preference or another. The impression we got and consistently would get is that the actual People's Republic of China would have no it just would seem very improbable that the Chinese government itself would have a preference in the election.
So I take it from this that whatever intelligence reporting there was on that, it did not reach your ears.
No.
Okay. Thanks. You can take that down now, Mr. Clerk.
And there's also the issue of the difference between foreign interference and attempts by different countries to influence behavior. Diplomats around the world are in their roles to try and influence favorable behaviors by the countries in which they're serving towards the country they represent. That is a big part of the role of a diplomat, of a foreign official, of all types. Canadians certainly take an active role in furthering our interests, including from time to time having certain preferences around what might happen or might be an outcome of an election or a particular domestic debate in a foreign country. However, foreign interference happens when there is, and there's a full proper definition of it somewhere, but my understanding is where it's covert, where it's coercive, where it is using pressure or particularly untoward means other than having a diplomat express, I really hope you should sign this trade deal, it'd be good for both of our countries, as opposed to trying to strong-arm people behind the scenes to get them to sign said trade deal or whatever one might examine. So for a diplomat to express a preference, whether it be personal or tactical or what have you, is not in itself foreign interference. It may be attempts at influence. It may not be anything other than the regular conduct of diplomacy.
So it would be the actions they take to further their preference that would constitute potentially foreign interference.
And certainly in the case of China, we have seen regularly that many examples of this commission that there are clear actions that would amount to or indicate a willingness to engage in foreign interference.
The next incident I want to bring you to is CAN 001082, Mr. Clerk. This is another briefing, Prime Minister, that was given to the cleared representative of the Liberal Party at the time. It's the 2021 election this time. You probably, judging from that document, can't say very much about this, but what I'm interested in knowing here is the timing of how this one played out, again, from your perspective. So we know that the briefing was actually on the 12th of September, I believe, not the 11th, as this document indicates, but it was given again to the Liberal Party representative and then to Mr. Broadhurst, and we've heard Mr. Broadhurst's evidence on it, so now we'd like yours.
My understanding is, which I learned after the election was over, was that Mr. Broadhurst made the determination that it wasn't something that he needed to bring to my attention as leader of the Liberal Party, and he did not.
He did not bring it to your attention?
He did not bring it to my attention.
During the election?
During the election, yes.
After the election?
He did not, or he probably did, but I actually got more official briefings on this matter after the election.
Okay, I understand. Okay.
He was the vehicle for briefing me theoretically during the election, not officials, because that's the way it would flow through as party leader in my party leader role. But afterwards, once I was once again fully Prime Minister, it was officials who would be able to brief me on this.
Okay. Speaking of briefings, we're going to turn to that topic now. So I'm going to go through a few briefings that we know we think you received. We do know that you received in many instances on foreign interference over the relevant time period. I'll start with February 9th, 2021. This one I don't really have a document to point you to, so I'm just going to ask you for your recollection of it. So this would be, again, February 9th, 2021. Do you recall receiving a briefing on that date?
Yes, that was a briefing that I got on the phone. I was not in person for that briefing. I was there via teleconference on a secure phone, and yes, I got a briefing.
Okay. Do you recall the content of that briefing at all?
It was as I recall, a general briefing on a number of issues, including foreign interference.
Okay. The next one then in time skips to the fall of 2022. Mr. Clerk, can you pull up CAN 015842, please? Okay, this document, which has been talked about quite a bit in these proceedings, is briefing notes to the director of CSIS. And Mr. Clerk, again, can you scroll down just so the Prime Minister can see a bit of the document and its content? So, Prime Minister, my first question is, do you remember getting this briefing in the fall of 2022, October 27th?
Yes, my memory is always better when I was physically in the place where I got the briefing. So I remember very clearly this briefing. This briefing was actually an overview of a number of different cases and situations, none of which had to do with federal elections.
So would you say that the content of these notes, these briefing notes, accurately conveys what you were told during that briefing?
Not particularly. Obviously, there are elements in this that are consistent with the briefing that was on different elements of foreign interference. But when it comes to briefings, and others can speak to this and how they make decisions about what to read from their prepared notes during an actual briefing with ministers or Prime Minister. But it is much more of a conversation than someone reading a prepared text to the minister that they're briefing. There are elements in here that say, for example, having read the briefing note in preparation for this this inquiry, that talk about how serious foreign interference is and how we need to do more. That wouldn't have been something that the CSIS director or the national security advisors or whoever would have had to spend much time on, because they would have known that we did understand how serious foreign interference is and how much we take it seriously. And actually, that was why we would spend more time on specific cases or concerns that were really the meat of the briefing. So while notes are prepared for the briefers, what actually becomes the most important thing that I certainly recall about those briefings was the various and specific cases we went through and how they are examples of concern or not concern, that we then have to behave in certain ways or have follow-ups on this or that. I mean, it is much less a large theoretical briefing and much more concrete. This is a situation, and then the discussion about how we deal with this particular situation or example or another would be where the larger theoretical discussion and implications would come in, but they would be concentrated around specific individuals or cases.
Okay. So maybe we'll pull up now Ms. Telford's notes from that meeting. So that's CAN 009803. They're a little more sparse than Brian Clow's would be, but at least we have a few points here. Do these notes help shed any light on what was dealt with in that briefing for you, Prime Minister? Do these seem familiar?
Yes, I think the 1, 2, 3 indicates that different examples that we were, or the situations, or actually there are cases that we were talking about, or individuals we were talking about. And the bragging is not doing definitely helps me recall a part of the conversation where there was, and let me be careful how I say this so it's not identifiable. There was a foreign government official based in Canada who was taking credit for a certain thing having happened in Canada in their reporting to a superior or to their home country. And just the fact that a foreign official was taking credit for having delivered a particular outcome in no way meant that anything that particular official did actually created the outcome. Bragging is not doing. So, one can imagine a diplomat in a far-off land, wanting to write back home to say, see, look what I did, aren't I good? We got the outcome we wanted, perhaps. When that individual may not have had any actual bearing on the outcome of the particular event.
Okay.
I don't know if that's sufficiently clear for what it was.
It is, and thank you. The last document maybe on this point, 4097. '79, 4079, sorry. No, sorry, 4079, my bad. There we go. Okay, so again, these are notes from that day. So if you can have a quick look at these, Prime Minister. The non-redacted parts of these. And what you'll see there is a text box over information that's been redacted but summarized by the Commission. Does this seem familiar as information that was discussed at that meeting?
During that same October meeting? Sorry, what was that?
Yes, that's the October meeting.
I couldn't really speak to it. There's too many redactions on a document that I would never have seen.
Fair enough. Okay, next one then is November 30th, 2022. Can we pull up, please, Mr. Clerk, CAN 014285? So this is a memo to you, Prime Minister, of November 30th, 2022. And Mr. Clerk, again, if you can scroll down so the Prime Minister can see the document, past the transmittal note. A memorandum for you by the NSIA, copied to the clerk, claims of foreign interference in the 2019 general election for information. And the context of this, Prime Minister, is this is shortly after the media leaks have started about foreign interference. So a memo was written, and we can again scroll through a bit to see the content of that memo. You could just keep going a little faster than that. I'm not really going to stop on anything. But I will ask you now that you've seen it a little bit to just scroll back up to the summary part, Mr. Clerk. Okay, there we go. PCO searched its holdings. So what's happening here is the NSIA and PCO are trying to figure out what you were briefed on and when. And so there's a paragraph here. PCO searched its holdings, engaged security and intelligence partners to identify instances when briefings on suspected FI in the 2019 general election were provided. That identified a single PCO information note dated January 14th, 2020, which is the one that we've seen earlier, and then it references the February 9th, 2021 briefing. Is that consistent with your recollection of when you were briefed on these issues?
Sorry, is this note of November 30th, 2022 was when we were asking, okay, there have been all these leaks on, what may have happened during the 2019 election, and we were asking, were these things we got briefed on? Were these things that we were flagged at that time? And yes, that's the single PCO information note dated January 24th, 2020.
And then the February 9th, 2021 briefing. So all I'm asking is whether that's consistent with your recollection of when you were briefed on these issues.
But I wasn't, these were requests I made a request to our National Security and Intelligence Advisor because there were things being alleged in the leaks that we had not been briefed on. So I'm not entirely certain about the briefing dates there given, because there were things, including those 11 candidates as a quote, that we had never been briefed on until we saw them in the papers, because following the leaks.
Right. So I guess maybe my question wasn't clear. The content of this particular document, I'm not asking you about, except just to confirm that this is consistent with your recollection of when you were briefed, the January 2020 and the February 2021.
January 2020
was the memo that we looked at earlier.
Sorry, that was the David Morrison memo?
Right.
I never read the David Morrison memo to my recollection. I got briefed on the contents, which was basically that foreign interference was lower than expected and the elections were free and fair in 2019. Those were the top level conclusions that I was briefed on within days or weeks of the end of the 2019 election. By the time we got around to January, it was good to have that report. I ended up reading the Judd report, I believe, was the full assessment of the work that the panel did during the 2019 election, but I did not read that. I did not receive that January 24th note because I'd already been briefed on its entire contents.
Okay.
And then the February 9th, 2021, what note was that? Was the phone brief that we spoke about earlier? Yes.
Right. I guess that goes back to your point about oral briefings are what really get to you, not necessarily the written ones. Okay, can we then pull up, Mr. Clerk, CAN 017673?
And let me just, I mean, I wouldn't want to give people the impression that briefings weren't something particularly, intelligence briefings we took very, very seriously. But in most of these secure briefings, we would go into a SCIF, a secure compartmentalized room, we were told to leave our phones outside, take off our watches and our Fitbits, make sure we're totally secure within a Faraday cage. Then we receive the briefings, often being told, no, we can't keep any of the documents that are given. We can read the documents that are given, but we then need to return them to the officials. Certainly in the beginning, we were never clear on whether we could take notes on this either, because security was important. Fortunately, as we've all seen through various inquiries, it's a good thing Brian Cloud does take notes. But you know, there was always a sense that there was lots of written material and lots of tracking of that information, as a government must, in taking very seriously all these things and very careful controls. But when it came to briefing and taking actions and understanding the context, it happened through secure briefings and conversations that were primarily us receiving information, us asking questions, us directing further actions or research in this area or that area that they would then take away and do. I wouldn't want anyone to think that, oh, because the briefings were primarily oral, or, for example, that David Morrison memo I didn't read because it wasn't delivered to me, because I got the content in other conversations with my NSIA, with my clerk, about the fact that the election integrity was upheld.
Okay. We'll just go to some other notes then. I believe these are Brian Cloud's notes from November 30th, 2022. Do you recall this briefing or this meeting, Prime Minister?
My notes indicate that this was immediately before question period, a briefing that happened over lunch hour as I was preparing to go in to deal with some fairly intense questioning on the issue of foreign interference, given the explosive nature of the media stories stemming from unsubstantiated and uncorroborated intelligence shared by a leaker. So these were, these were conversations around what I could say and what we could and couldn't say around some of these allegations that were in the paper, but would leave us limited on what we could actually rebut, regardless of the fact that there were inconsistencies, there were uncorroborated information in the leaks. There were also things that were flat out wrong, but I was reminded of the old story of some FBI agent questioning a witness in an organized crime situation and saying, well, did you meet with that mobster in LA? The guy says, I can't comment. Did you meet with that mobster in Detroit? I can't comment. Did you meet with that mobster in Miami? No, I definitely did not. Sometimes in denying something, you're giving information you couldn't. And throughout my preoccupation and why these leaks were of such deep concern was that we couldn't actually correct the record without, in some cases, confirming the tradecraft and the work that women and men in our security agencies and sources relied upon by our security agencies to keep Canadians and our institutions safe, without putting them at risk, without sharing with adversaries some of the information or the methods that we use to keep Canadians safe. And that's part of the reason for the complex nature of a public inquiry into issues of foreign interference, that if we say certain things or if we contradict or deny other things, we could be giving our adversaries tools to actually understand how we go about detecting their interference or illicit ways of engaging to harm Canadians.
It's a complex problem. So the next, I'm going to keep going with the briefings and the post-leak world briefings specifically, Prime Minister. Not long left, but CAN 018009, please. So these are notes from, the date on the notes is March 19th, but we know it was actually March 20th. So this is March 20th, 2023, a meeting in which you were present, and I believe your staff was present, and a number of senior national security officials. So if we scroll down, so again, Mr. Prime Minister, you can see the content of this document, or the unredacted content. Are you able to tell us your recollection of what was happening at this meeting based on these notes?
Yes, I remember this meeting well. If you actually scroll back up, please, Mr. Clerk, a little higher, so we get both. There, right there is fine. PM, that's me. Speaking of nominations, we were talking about, thank you for we were talking about nominations in there, and I don't remember who the next speaker was. That's redacted. But the emphasis on charter rights, or the bringing up of charter rights, and further down, PM, no June 2019 meeting. Those are two examples of us working constructively with CSIS and the intelligence agencies to better understand and validate certain pieces of information. For example, in the information we were seeing, we'd seen that CSIS had a source that said that there was a June 2019 meeting that I was at that I can clearly and unequivocally at the time and since then confirm never happened. I did not have the meeting that the source had said. Now, this doesn't mean that CSIS got it wrong. It meant that CSIS was now able to validate that what their source had said in this situation was wrong, and therefore that puts a particular understanding or color on their ability to interpret other statements of fact or supposed fact that source made. And that's part of how intelligence work happens. When you know for sure, when a source says something that you can verify is true, that makes them more reliable. When a source says something that you can then verify was wrong, that also gives you more information about that source. So it was important for us to highlight, for example, in that meeting, that there was no meeting as was described by that source. Similarly, on the question of charter rights, that was a slightly different tweak, where in the CSIS analysis, the analyst had highlighted that there was possible violations of people's charter rights in a particular situation. And we had asked and pressed for more sort of legal or judicial analysis of that assertion within, because it didn't quite ring true to our instincts as political actors in terms of the analysis that CSIS was making. Again, it's part of the process that one goes through as you engage with the experts in foreign intelligence and security in an active way to try and make sure we're understanding, getting the accurate picture, and able to then continue to keep both Canadians and our institutions safe through the various jobs we do.
Madame la Commissaire, I think I'm out of time. Vous me permettez une dernière question?
Certainement.
Parfait. Mr. Prime Minister, I'm going to sort of ask you to conclude this by addressing the following question. So we've heard about the existence of foreign interference, the pervasiveness of the threat, and various measures that, as you said, have been put in place to combat this. You may know that earlier in these proceedings, we heard from a number of individuals who found themselves sort of in the receiving end, being targeted by potential foreign interference in some ways. And there have been calls for the government to do more than it's done already to address this and to protect Canadians. And in particular, I'll just read you a small excerpt of the former MP Kenny Chiu when he was testifying here. He said that experiencing what he'd gone through in terms of the potential PRC misinformation, well, we don't know PRC, but potentially PRC-related misinformation, disinformation, potential foreign interference, he said, it's almost like I was drowning and they were watching. And the best they could do, by the way, is to let me know that I'm drowning. I don't need their notification, I need their help. So, Prime Minister, I'd like to hear your response to that. And essentially, maybe in providing this response, help set the stage for the second phase of the Commission's work.
Starting by perhaps taking a bit of a step back and the idea that we need to do more, I agree. When we took office in 2015, there was very little, if any, mechanisms to counter foreign interference. Yes, our intelligence agencies did good work, but the idea or the priority of protecting our democracy, particularly when it comes to misinformation, disinformation, active engagement in various diaspora communities or electoral events, was not on the radar at all when we took office. It hadn't been something that the previous government or any previous government had done much on at all. So we started from a standing start. We created the National Security Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians. We created NSIRA. We moved forward with the Rapid Response Mechanism, and we've continued to do more. Yes, the panel for the 2019 and 2021 elections cite, but we've continued to do more. We recently brought in a National Security Committee, National Security Council of Cabinet to address sort of strategic threats on a larger level. We're continuing to give more tools and powers and learning from what the P5 was able to do in 2019 and 2021 that they'll be able to apply in the 2025 election when it's likely to come. There is always more to do, and one of the things I'm very much looking forward to coming from the work this commission is doing is to make recommendations on how we can strengthen even further the protection of institutions and of our democracy. But that's only half of it. The other half is giving Canadians confidence in their institutions and their democracy. And whether it's a diaspora member worried about stepping up to running for elected office in this country because they're worried about the impact that might be real or perceived from a country they chose to leave many years ago for whatever reasons. There are real concerns and feelings involved. And ultimately, democracy only works when people are confident in its ability to keep them safe, but also be the articulation of what they want for their community and their country. That's where confidence in the integrity of the elections in 2019, 2021 is so important, and something that we have emphasized throughout this process, that every briefing I've ever got from all my intelligence and security experts is that those elections were indeed free and fair, and nothing we have seen and heard, despite, yes, attempts by foreign states to interfere, those elections held in their integrity were decided by Canadians. But the feeling that individuals can have that maybe our institutions aren't so strong, maybe they are impacted by foreign actors who wish to do ill to Canada and to Canadians, is something that we need to be very, very thoughtful about. And one of the ways ultimately to keep ensuring that our democracy is safe is to make sure that citizens themselves are engaged, active, critical thinkers who are empowered to see what is information, what is misinformation or disinformation, and be robust in their right to choose whatever direction they want for the country. And we've seen with the intensity of misinformation and disinformation, not just from foreign actors, but just on social media generally in many pockets, that it's not automatic. Democracy requires constant vigilance and constant hard work. Didn't happen by accident, doesn't continue without effort. It's not just effort of commissioners and politicians and spooks. It's efforts of every single individual to feel like they have the full ability to engage in our democratic processes and to feel that they are safe and protected as they engage, whether it's as a voter or a candidate or an elected member of parliament or of provincial parliament or wherever. These are things that we all need to continue to work together on. And I am in constant awe of everyone across this country who continues to put up their hand and step forward in a time where it's getting more and more difficult and more challenging to be part of public and political discourse, to say, no, I want to build my country for the better. I want to contribute to my community, and I'm going to step forward into a place where I'm going to take slings and arrows, particularly members of diaspora communities. But bringing in that diversity of Canadians' experiences is the only way to make sure that we're actually building the kind of country we need to be for the future. So I salute everyone who steps up, and will continue to commit myself to making sure that those feelings of confidence and of safety as we engage as citizens or more as our democracy are protected.
Madame la Commissaire, ce sont mes questions.
Merci. J'en ai quelques-unes pour vous, Monsieur le Premier ministre.
Bien sûr.
À votre connaissance, existe-t-il un mécanisme ou une procédure en place pour faire en sorte que la NSAI, moi aussi je cherche le mot en français, ait toujours accès et reçoive toujours l'information qui circule en matière d'ingérence étrangère?
La NSAA a le rôle de rassembler et d'aller chercher toute l'information dans tous nos différentes agences de sécurité, que ce soit à la Défense, que ce soit aux Affaires étrangères ou à CICIS, CSI ou la GRC. C'est vraiment la personne qui est à mes côtés pour coordonner tout cet univers-là. Alors, elle a la capacité et le pouvoir d'aller chercher ces réponses. D'ailleurs, quand je me suis réveillé ce matin et voyant des rapports dans les médias qui amenaient certaines préoccupations, je me suis immédiatement tourné vers ma NSAA pour dire, peux-tu faire un suivi sur ce que je suis en train de lire ce matin et me revenir avec des informations. Et moi, j'ai confiance que quel que soit l'univers ou l'endroit dans l'univers de sécurité et renseignement où l'information se trouve, elle a accès à tout cet univers-là. C'est la personne vers laquelle tout est éventuellement conjugué.
Et je veux bien comprendre, donc, elle a accès à tout, mais est-ce que, par ailleurs, tous, que ce soit les agences, que ce soit les différents ministères, systématiquement transmettre l'information relative à l'ingérence étrangère à la NSAI?
Je suis confiant qu'elle reçoit l'information que les différentes agences trouve pertinent, mais comme on a vu, il y a toujours des améliorations à faire sur la façon que différents départements et différents secteurs du gouvernement travaillent ensemble, et l'existence même de la NSIA permet d'avoir un point d'autorité et de capacité d'aller exiger les réponses et les informations de partout.
Lorsque vous recevez des renseignements et au sens d'intelligence, là,
Oui.
Qui ne sont peut-être pas encore corroborés, mais qui sont susceptibles d'être extrêmement importants et d'avoir un impact significatif. Est-ce que vous pouvez demander aux agences, en établissant une liste de priorités, de compléter ou de poursuivre les enquêtes qui sont entreprises?
Absolument. Mais souvent et presque dans toutes les situations, quand je dis il faudrait faire un suivi là-dessus, ce que j'entends, c'est on est en train de le faire et voici ce qu'on est en train de faire. Évidemment, le travail que font les agences ne dépend pas d'un premier ministre pour dire « Ah, vous devriez vraiment faire un suivi là-dessus ». Ils vont suivre les enjeux préoccupants. Oui, un gouvernement, un premier ministre peut accorder plus d'emphase, peut mettre de la pression pour aller plus vite, peut envoyer plus de ressources, mais nos systèmes et nos agences de sécurité de renseignement ont les mandats et les responsabilités pour pouvoir faire les suivis sur des enjeux préoccupants.
Et vous pouvez le faire en changeant les priorités qui peuvent être à ce moment-là déjà établies.
Oui, on peut modifier, on peut accroître. Certainement, on a une réflexion régulière sur les priorités en matière de sécurité pour le pays. L'emphase qu'on met sur la cybersécurité, par exemple, c'était pas ce que c'était il y a 10 ans, par exemple. Le monde est en train d'évoluer. La réalité d'un monde où les grands pouvoirs sont en train de changer d'orientation, où la Russie est devenue extrêmement problématique et pas juste un peu problématique comme elle était il y a 10 ans, on s'ajuste constamment et les élus ont un rôle important à jouer là-dedans, mais certainement le travail que font nos agences de renseignement et de sécurité procède de façon robuste de toute façon.
Lorsque votre directeur de campagne, M. Brothers, vous informe qu'il y a des allégations voulant que des personnes aient été transportées par autobus pour voter à une investiture, est-ce que vous demandez, vous, que des vérifications additionnelles soient effectuées?
Par rapport au parti, oui, j'ai demandé d'abord qu'est-ce qu'on a comme information là-dessus et est-ce que tu peux faire un suivi, est-ce que vous pouvez faire un suivi avec, que le parti fasse un suivi avec Élections Canada pour voir les rapports qui ont été remplis, pour voir les conclusions, voir si on a d'autres informations. Mais la réalité, c'est dans des nominations contestées, il y a presque toujours des autobus. Dans certaines situations, ces autobus sont payés par le candidat soi-même et comme ça, ils seront sur la liste de dépenses soumise à Action Canada. Mais dans d'autres situations, comme j'ai dit, c'est des autobus qui appartiennent à un centre d'âge d'or qui sont utilisés ou qui sont utilisés par d'autres, qui sont commandés par d'autres. Et là, il n'y aura peut-être pas des reçus là-dessus. Moi, dans mon propre concours à la nomination en février-mars, mars-avril peut-être, 2007, il y avait plusieurs autobus d'Italiens et de Grecs parce que c'était la réalité pour mon comté de Papineau. C'est quelque chose qui est assez commun et ça n'aurait pas été assez pour que quelqu'un regardant comment ça se déroulait, la nomination, automatiquement dise qu'il faudrait faire un suivi immédiat là-dessus. On n'est pas une une organisation we're not a forensic organization, c'est de regarder à ce point-là en termes d'un parti qui fonctionne principalement par bénévoles. On est limité dans ce qu'on peut aller regarder 3 semaines plus tard.
Et vous avez, si mes notes sont justes, vous avez indiqué que c'était une question to be revisited after the elections. Est-ce que la question a été revisited after the elections?
Oui.
Oui, par le parti.
Par le parti, je ne suis pas sûr qu'il y avait je suis sûr que oui, il y avait eu des vérifications, mais les vérifications ont été faites de façon assez complète, j'en suis sûr, immédiatement après qu'ils auraient été avisés par le Site Task Force. Je ne suis pas certain qu'il y aurait eu beaucoup plus de recherches qui auraient pu découler pendant des mois par la suite ou même des semaines parce que on avait l'information qu'on avait et on n'en avait pas beaucoup plus que ça. S'il y avait eu des enquêtes d'Élections Canada à cause d'irrégularités, ça, il y aurait eu des suivis, mais ça, c'est Élections Canada qui pourrait en parler. Pour moi, les suivis, c'était au niveau de l'engagement possible d'autorités chinoises ici au Canada qui auraient pris un intérêt actif dans un candidat particulier, dans un processus de nomination particulier. C'est à ce niveau-là où on aurait fait des suivis, pas pour voir, OK, est-ce qu'on peut savoir la vérité sur ce qui s'est passé dans la nomination, parce que ça, c'est peut-être très difficile à voir, mais est-ce qu'on peut établir un peu plus de clarté sur le rôle ou l'intérêt potentiel qu'une autorité chinoise aurait eu par rapport à ce candidat particulier.
Merci.
Merci.
Alors, avant, before the cross-examination, we are supposed to take a break, and I think we will take a break. So, but we are running late a little bit, so I suggest a 10 minutes break, actually. So we'll come back at 5:15.
Order, please. À l'ordre, s'il vous plaît. The sitting of the Foreign Interference Commission is in recess until 5:15. Cette séance de la Commission de l'ingérence étrangère est en pause jusqu'à 17h15.
So the first one to conduct cross-examination is counsel for Michael Chang.
Prime Minister.
Give.
You've already heard Ms. Chowdhury telling you that we had Mr. Broadhurst in yesterday. And I'll just ask the court reporter to turn up the document that you've already seen and that we went through with Mr. Broadhurst, and that's CAN 5461, please. And so this is the document that we looked at earlier. I took Mr. Broadhurst through it because I wanted to have his evidence about what he told you. And of course, the value of this document is that it sticks to the things that we can talk about in an open proceeding like this. And so I just want to show you the key points. Of course, the first one is that there were allegations of foreign interference by China in the Don Valley North nomination contest. And then secondly, if you just scroll down a little bit, please. This is the redacted bit. Thank you. Sorry. There we are. The summary of the redaction is buses being used to bring international students to the nomination process in support of Han Dong at the direction of PRC officials in Canada. And so it's that second paragraph that I want to focus on to begin with. And I just want to begin by noting that there's nothing in this summary that indicates what language the students were speaking. They're described as international students. And the reason why I'm noting that is that in your evidence earlier and also in the witness statements that you adopted at the beginning, You referred to people on the bus, the students, at points as being Chinese-speaking peoples or Chinese speakers. Do you recall that? I can take you to the passages if you like.
No. No, I appreciate that. One of the challenges that I have is remembering what I knew at a particular moment when months later, even years later, I would find out more information about this, means that I'm never 1,000% precise on what it is that I knew at a particular moment.
Yes, I do appreciate that.
I do remember at one point when we were talking about whether or not CSIS understood how nomination races worked and how community organizations would regularly bring buses. There was a quote, or there was someone relayed to me that one of CSIS's concerns was there were bus filled with Chinese speakers showing up at the nomination. And my response, as I sort of alluded to in my previous testimony, was, well, I had buses filled with Greek speakers and Italian speakers because in my nomination in Papineau, those were the communities that were mobilized. That phrase stuck in my head, but I will admit that I do not specifically remember whether or not the Chinese speakers or Mandarin speakers element was part of that, what I call the airport briefing, that briefing on this particular Sunday during the campaign, or not.
Yes.
But it certainly is consistent with this.
All right. No, that's very helpful. And I will ask the court reporter to turn up WIT 067 on this. And if you'll go, Mr. Clerk, to paragraph 30, which is, starting at paragraph 29, please. Paragraph 29, there we are. Right, thank you. And so the last sentence is the concern was that buses of Chinese speakers had arrived at the nomination or possibly been brought into the nomination. And then if we go to paragraph 30 and just over the page, the top of the next page, a little further, there we are. Prime Minister, you see the last sentence, the central issue of concern was that buses filled with Chinese speakers could have been international students directed by the PRC. So the point that I want to make with you, Prime Minister, and it sounds to me like perhaps you've already got it, is that the central concern of the service here, as I understand it, is not that they were Chinese speakers. No. It's that they were directed by the PRC. Had these people been students from Switzerland rather than China, but were brought at the behest of China and to do China's bidding, I say the service's concerns would have been absolutely the same, which is that this would be foreign interference.
Yes, entirely. It is not the nature of that. That is part of what I remember as context around the service's concerns that China might have mobilized individuals. Yes.
Thank you. And I appreciate you acknowledging that, and I'll tell you why. And it's because, as you will recall, there have been times where you have, let us say, cautioned us all as the news about the allegations in Don Valley North came out and as other allegations concerning Han Dong came out. You have, as I say, let us say, cautioned Canadians not to fall into anti-Chinese or anti-Asian stereotypes around this. And what I want to press on you here is that the ethnicity or the language of these students has never been the issue either for the service or for any right-thinking Canadian. The concern instead is that PRC was directing people, whoever they were, to go do their bidding and to help Han Dong into his seat in Parliament. And you can have that concern and worry about that and worry about the consequences for our democracy without having an ounce of racial prejudice running through your veins. Do you agree with me on that?
Entirely, and that was actually the point that I made to the service, that I made in response to them saying, or the suggestion that, the concern is the bus filled with Chinese speakers. I say, that has absolutely no bearing on anything.
And I want to be clear, though, I hope it is your evidence that you did not feel that the service itself was acting in some racially prejudiced way.
No, my concern was more that perhaps the service didn't understand as deeply as political actors do the prevalence of busing of different community groups in nomination campaigns.
Right, and let's come to that point as well. If we could go to WIT 66, please. That's your other statement. Paragraph 24, please. Thank you, and actually it's at the top of page 7, so keep scrolling a little. Yes, stop there. In the middle of the page, Prime Minister, the fact that there were buses of Chinese-speaking people at the nomination meeting did not necessarily corroborate the allegation that the PRC was responsible. And in fact, I should have read you the sentence before as well. He, meaning you, Prime Minister, also remembered that the intelligence was only an allegation, included no evidence that the people being bused to polls were supported by PRC officials, right? And you go on to say, Prime Minister, that you remembered asking whether the service understood that busing is part of the nomination process. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And again, going back to the reporting I just showed you, there's obviously a reference to busing there. But what I want to suggest to you is that the emphasis, again, wasn't on the mode of travel for these people. They took buses this time, all right. They could have come some other way, and it wouldn't terribly matter for the services perspective because their concern was that they were directed by PRC and assisted in getting to the nomination place in order to, allegedly, help one candidate over another. So the way they got there doesn't matter one way or another. I understand your point that you wanted to make sure that CSIS understood that buses per se are not a problem. But my proposition to you, sir, is that when you read that statement, the emphasis is on direction by China. Yes, they got there by buses. That's the allegation. They could have got there by tricycles. It doesn't terribly matter. The point is they were directed by China.
I would suggest that it might be more difficult for a foreign actor to organize fleets of individuals showing up on tricycles rather than filling them into a bus.
I expect that's right. But one way or another, let's say they managed that miracle, CSIS would still be concerned, and rightly so.
Absolutely.
Yes. All right. I would like to take you to the David Johnson report for a moment now. That's at COM 104. And if you'll go to page 23, please. Now, I forgot that this is in 2 columns, so I'm not sure where I'm going to find my quote. Let me read it to you. I don't think it's controversial. You may recall that Mr. Johnson, and I hope we can find it in here somewhere, but Mr. Johnson concluded in respect of the Don Valley North allegations. He said, quote, "There is a well-grounded suspicion that the irregularities were tied to the PRC consulate in Toronto." Do you recall that, sir? I can try to find it for you if you don't. One moment.
Yes, there it is. Irregularities were observed.
Yes, and then there we are, and there is, thank you very much, Prime Minister, and there is a well-grounded suspicion that the irregularities were tied to the PRC consulate in Toronto. That's what I wanted to ask you about. Now, I fully appreciate, sir, that that was not a conclusion you were able to make or prepared to make in September 2019. But my question for you is today, now that we've had Mr. Johnson's report and he's come to that conclusion, do you accept, first, that there were irregularities in that nomination contest, and secondly, that they were likely tied to the PRC consulate in Toronto?
I'd suggest that irregularities being observed is not itself enough to overturn a democratic event. And I'd also suggest that a well-grounded suspicion is certainly warranting more reflection and follow-ups, but also might not hit the necessarily very high threshold for overturning the result of a democratic event.
Yes, but I don't think that's what Mr. Johnson is speaking to. He's just saying that there is a well-grounded suspicion that the irregularities, which he seems to have found, were tied to the consulate. And what I want to know is, do you accept those conclusions today?
Yes, sorry, if you're not asking me about how I accept that there is a suspicion that PRC officials in Canada were engaged in some way with that nomination. I can't speak to irregularities. Perhaps you know what irregularities specifically Mr. Johnson was talking about?
No, not as well as some people in this room. All right. Well, you do accept, though, and you say that there's a suspicion. Do you accept that it's well-grounded? That was Mr. Johnson's view.
I can't speak to analysis made by others. I certainly, and again, distinguishing what I knew in 2019 from what I may have learnt later leaves me in an awkward position around answering this.
All right. I'll move to my next document, and that is CAN 15842, please. And you've seen this already. It is the late October 2022 briefing. You've already given evidence that your briefings are oral. You didn't see this document per se, and I've got that point, sir. But I do want to go to page 2 of the document. Scrolling down a little further. There we are. Thank you. My question for you is, did the director say words to the effect of, or convey the message that, as you see here, Canada has been slower than our Five Eyes allies to respond to the foreign interference threat?
No.
All right. And if you continue on in that same passage, such as proactively publicizing successful disruption activities, was that something that the director conveyed to you?
No. When I spoke to this before, I believe I said that the briefing notes prepared for the director didn't particularly align with the actual briefing we got.
Yes.
The briefing was spent almost entirely on specific cases, and all of these notes prepared for the director, generally saying, yes, foreign interference is serious, India, China, serious, would have taken up the first 30 seconds of what the director said, because
Understood.
He would have gotten right into the cases. So this is not...
I'm just going to show you one more point from this. I do have your point about that. It's page 3.
It's going to be your last question.
Yes, thank you. Yes, it's the bullet point that begins with the word ultimately. Ultimately, state actors are able to conduct foreign interference successfully in Canada because there are no consequences, either legal or political. Foreign interference is therefore a low risk and high reward endeavor. Did the director convey, in those words or in some similar words, that message that this is a low risk, high reward endeavor because there are no consequences?
No.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Thank you. Counsel for Jenny Kwan.
Minister, good afternoon. So, Prime Minister, it's a matter of public record that MP Kwan has alleged that she may have been the target of foreign interference by the Communist Party of China in the 2021 general election. And so based on that premise, there's time permitting, there's 3 sets of issues I hope we could discuss. The first is how MP Kwan came to know from CSIS that she was a target for foreign interference. The second is why she might be a target. And the third is how foreign interference might be occurring against her in Canada. So you're aware, Prime Minister, that MP Kwan received a confidential briefing from CSIS on May 26, 2023.
Yes.
And you're aware that she's not shared publicly any of the classified information she received in that briefing.
I believe that to be correct, yes.
But you're aware she stated that she was told that she is an evergreen target for the Communist Party of China and for the rest of her life, even after she leaves politics.
I can't speak to directly what she was told, but that seems consistent with what they might have told her, yes.
So Prime Minister, are you able in this setting to share with us whether you had any role in the decision to brief MP Kwan about foreign interference?
When there are allegations or information brought to me regarding a particular member of parliament or a particular individual, often one of our first responses in my office, my response, is to ask CSIS or the security agency involved to engage directly with the individual. The nature of that engagement, often we find that CSIS is already preparing to do that. Sometimes us encouraging it allows it or encourages it to happen more quickly. It's certainly something CSIS can make decisions about on its own as well. But I believe in this case, we encouraged those briefings to happen.
And so you encourage them to happen. And if you're able to comment, was one of the reasons why you and your office encouraged the briefing to happen was to enable MP Kwan to herself identify foreign interference that might be occurring and to take steps, if she could, to counter foreign interference?
The challenge of foreign interference exists for, as we've heard, for just about every elected official at every different order of government as a potential threat. But we also know that diaspora communities, particularly from certain countries of origin, are more susceptible to be targets on that. So whether it's defensive briefings or threat reduction measures, which are two different approaches that CSIS and others can use in terms of briefing, they are designed to both inform, make aware, and hopefully help the individual in avoiding the kind of interference that is of concern.
And so one goal is to help individuals avoid foreign interference if it's occurring, so a self-help remedy, if we could. But surely another purpose would be to urge an individual to come forth with concerns about potential foreign interference to CSIS or the RCMP or the Commissioner of Canada Elections or some other federal authority. Is that right? Right. And of course, for anyone to come forward, a member of Parliament or any Canadian who might be targeted for foreign interference, the expectation would be that if they presented such a complaint or a concern, that it would be investigated thoroughly.
That it would be given the attention that it merits, yes.
Okay. And so I want to dig in a bit to why MP Kwan might have been targeted and what your thoughts are. So you're aware that MP Kwan has testified here that she believes she's been targeted for foreign interference because of her outspoken criticism over many years of the human rights record of the People's Republic of China. Are you aware of that?
Yes.
Yeah, and so you're aware of her criticisms of the Tiananmen Square massacre.
Yes.
And the Hong Kong national security law.
Yes, like many Canadians of all different origins, but particularly progressive Canadians of Chinese origin, there are some very, very strong and outspoken and brave individuals who speak up against the government of their country of origin.
And she made some of those criticisms as a parliamentarian on the floor of the House of Commons.
Yes.
So, for example, when she spoke in favor of and voted in favor of the resolution on the Uyghur genocide. And so it's clear then in making these criticisms, she was exercising her right to free speech, you'd agree?
Yes.
And that she was exercising her parliamentary privilege when
Yes.
she made those criticisms. And no Canadian...
And I'd also say more, she was fulfilling her responsibilities as a member of parliament to represent her constituents and her community in our parliament.
Agreed. And that no Canadian, MP or not, should be subject to foreign interference for expressing their political views.
Indeed, yes.
So I want to then take you then, if I may, Prime Minister, to how foreign interference by the CCP might be occurring in Canada. And so we've had testimony that the CCP's foreign interference activities occur through the United Front, an arm of the Chinese Communist Party. You're aware of that?
Not exclusively.
Right, but including through the United Front.
Yes, there are many different ways, and the United Front is one of the ways in which the Communist Party of China exerts either influence or perhaps in other cases interference.
And are you able to comment on the other ways?
Chinese police stations are a perfect example of something that's been in the news recently that our friend from the block asked about earlier today.
Good. And of course, the United Front often operates through proxies, we've learned. You agree that that's correct?
Yes.
And I think the words you used to describe foreign interference in your examination in chief were covert, coercive, deceptive. And so would it surprise you if you were told that the United Front might funnel funds to Chinese proxies in Canada?
I am wary of getting into too much of what I know in an open forum here, but I think there's been evidence submitted along the lines of that.
Okay, and you're aware that CSIS has confirmed that the United Front uses proxies to disinvite or deplatform regime opponents from invitations to important community events.
I would encourage you to go directly to the source of these reports and allegations. I can say that, yes, I am kept very, very highly briefed on various ways of interference. I'm not always sure which ones I can talk about that I know about that others may not know about, but if you're talking about public record things, then it's good that you're putting them into the record.
Sure, and so as a politician, of course, part of some of the rituals of Canadian political life involve attending events hosted by different ethnic communities that are potentially quite significant. So Vaisakhi would be one I'm sure that you might be familiar with.
Yes.
And so there is a certain significance then to having been invited for many years to an event and then suddenly disinvited in a public way. That would be designed to send a message. Wouldn't you agree?
I think publicly disinviting someone as wrong as it would be might fall into the category of influence rather than interference. If a diplomat is hosting an event that the Chinese government is behind or through with proxies, it's a fairly open and visible way, and perhaps meant to be open and visible, to exclude an individual. That sounds like as wrong or unfortunate, or much as we might disagree with it, it sounds like something that is not covert or surreptitious, but more very direct disapproval.
But if it's a community event organized by a Canadian organization,
I think we're getting into hypotheticals here, but I understand your point that it is unfortunate that China in general tries to silence critics of its regime, including high-profile members of parliament.
Okay, so a couple of concluding questions, if I may, Prime Minister. So the GAC panel testified that if the People's Republic of China, or for that matter any other foreign state, were engaged in foreign interference in Canada, it would violate international law. Do you have any reason to disagree with that evidence?
No, I am, yes, the foreign interference is violation of Canadian law and international law.
And you'd agree then it's a violation of Canadian sovereignty?
Yes.
Thank you, Prime Minister.
Thank you. Mr. Jarman, representing Erin O'Toole.
Thank you, Prime Minister, or thank you, Commissioner. Prime Minister, my name is Tom Jarman. I represent Erin O'Toole. Just building on a question that my colleague was asking, Mr. O'Toole, similar to Ms. Kwan, has also received a defensive briefing from CSIS. And was that done with the permission or direction of your office?
Again, it is not something that CSIS needs to get permission from the Prime Minister's office to do, but in this case, we certainly encouraged it.
Yeah. And has your office given general direction that when MPs come under this sort of, I guess, scrutiny or attack, that they should be made aware of that?
That is, in general, our approach on things, yes.
But yet, has your office given direction to that effect?
It is not to us to direct CSIS on what threat reduction or defensive briefings it gives or doesn't give, but certainly our posture has been one of encouraging CSIS to keep all parliamentarians informed and aware of not just threats against them, but of issues of foreign interference.
Okay, thank you. I guess if I could go to CAN 4495. And this is a document that supposedly relates to a briefing which was intended to occur sometime in late February of 2023. It was prepared by CSIS. Commission counsel has shown it to you, and I believe you also saw it during your witness interview. If you could scroll down to the third page. A little further, please. Thank you very much. Oops, back up, please. Thank you. So I understand from your witness interview that you were not advised of these events concurrent to them happening in the election in 2021. But I would ask, after February 21st of 2023, have you ever been briefed by either CSIS or the NSIA with respect to conclusions similar to this, that there were observed online and media activities aimed at discouraging Canadians, particularly Chinese heritage, from supporting the Conservative Party of Canada leader Erin O'Toole, and particularly Steveston, Richmond East, Kenny Chu? The timing of the efforts to align with Conservative polling improvements, similarities in language with articles published by the PRC state media, and the partnership agreements between these Canada-based outlets and PRC entities all suggest that these efforts were orchestrated or directed by the PRC.
I think on this, I'd like to turn to the summary prepared of evidence on this one. I believe
I think it's at 66, paragraph 49.
Sorry, I'm talking about the intelligence summaries, not the interview summaries, the prepared summaries. Redactors.
Madam Commissioner, I think the Prime Minister is referring to the multi-source topical summary.
That one. Topical summaries, yes. She or she.
I believe it's number 4, if that assists, dot 4.
We just scroll
Yes,
down.
I
on
have that
page.
one.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. That's it.
So that's a topical summary, but going back to my question, which was, has any official, either the NSIA or the director of CSIS or anyone on your staff, briefed you with respect to the conclusions that were in CAN 4495?
And just to be fair to the witness, perhaps he could be allowed to look at those conclusions one by one rather than
Sure.
in a mass.
Well, possibly you can go back to CAN 4495 then, please.
Yes, I have the summary, so if we can go back on the page to the document you brought up.
Thank you. Scroll down, thank you. Further. And just a little bit further, thank you. So the overall statement is observed online and media activities aimed at discouraging Canadians, particularly of Chinese heritage, from supporting Conservative Party leader Aaron O'Toole, and particularly Stevenson and Richmond East candidate Kenny Jew.
Yeah, what I would go to is the bottom of that, the last line in the second paragraph there, and refer to the general summary there, point 6, that says, no PRC state direction of the incident was detected or reported.
Yes, I realize that's what that document says. My question is, did anyone brief you with respect to those allegations that are in CAN 4495? And if your answer is no, that's fine.
First of all, these are briefing notes that I never saw. These are briefings for a briefer who then gave a briefing that, as we've seen, may or may not have included all of these things. I am and was, however, aware of the elements in the summary that talked about whether it's following the publication of the article in the Hill Times. There was a number of different media organizations that picked up and ran with those things. But again, getting to the bottom line that no Chinese state direction of the incident was detected or reported.
Thank you. And I'd like to turn now to COM 008, which is the cabinet directive from 2021 with respect to their critical action incident public protocol. And this is the standing directive right now. It is, unlike 2019, this is an ongoing thing. Is that correct?
Yes, this is the existing directive now, yes.
Okay. And we've heard from various witnesses, Madame Drouin, who said that the threshold for intervention by the panel of 5 would either be high or very high, were the words she used. Minister Gould used observe with certainty, and Minister LeBlanc used the high threshold as well. Is that consistent with your understanding of how the directive is meant to apply?
The directive is meant to apply and the panel is meant to kick in when there are threats to Canada being able to hold a free and fair election. That must necessarily be a significantly high threshold because just the act of engaging for the panel could itself have an impact on the unfolding of the election. So the expertise and the experience and the professional judgment of the people on the panel is what we lean on significantly for whether and how they intervene. I will highlight that not every intervention by the P5 would be to convene a supper hour press conference to tell Canadians about something in the middle of an election campaign. It could involve, as it has, apprising different parties of concerns. It could involve asking or working with a social media giant to take down a particular piece of misinformation. Like, there are different things that would have different thresholds in terms of what is required to do to ensure that the election remains free and fair for Canadians.
Possibly, can we scroll down in the directive itself, please? And into 5. there we are, the process. Actually, sorry, I have to go back up again. So they say, paragraph 3, please. You say, Minister, or Prime Minister rather, that this can be engaged by threats. The panel of 5 has testified that it must be an event that has occurred which affects a free and fair election, at which they would give notice to Canadians. Is it your evidence that the panel can act on perceived threat as opposed to an event?
I'd ask you actually to scroll down to, go to 4.0 or, no, next one, 5.0. There we go. Lays out a process through which Canadians would be notified of an incident that threatens Canada's ability to have a free and fair election should notification be necessary. I suppose an incident could be an event, but I think if there is an imminent threat to Canada's ability to have free and fair election, I have no doubt that the panel would engage with that, whether or not the incident or event had happened or was just imminently about to happen.
And just one last question, please, Commissioner. And that threat could crystallize at the general election level, at the riding level, or indeed among a diaspora community level that's spread out across several ridings.
Sorry, what's your question?
That threat could crystallize
yes.
at either the general election level, an individual riding level, or among a broader community that's spread out over several ridings.
Yes, as long as it threatened Canada's ability to have a free and fair election, either at the riding level or in the aggregate general election, which is just the sum of 338 individual riding elections.
Thank you. Thank you, Prime Minister.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you. Mr. De Luca, acting on behalf of the Conservative Party.
Good evening, Mr. Prime Minister. Could I have, just give me a moment, could I have TRN 6 called up, please? And while that's being called up, Mr. Prime Minister, in preparation for your testimony here today, have you been aware that MP Han Dong confirmed under oath at this inquiry that he spoke to PRC officials on multiple occasions about the two Michaels while they were held in captivity in China?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. And am I correct that the two Michaels had been taken into custody and detained in China commencing in December 2018 until they were released at the end of September 2021?
Yes.
Okay. Would you agree with me that the detention of the two Michaels was a very high profile and very sensitive matter, both in Canada and abroad?
It was certainly very high profile, and it was a detention that caused us to mobilize broadly. It was certainly a very difficult experience for the two Michaels and their families, but it was also something that mobilized an awful lot of not just Canadians, but our partners around the world.
Thank you. We've heard evidence and seen evidence in this inquiry that at least one of the conversations between Mr. Dong and the PRC General Consul General in Toronto was intercepted and monitored, that it touched upon the two Michaels in some respect, and that at least a summary of the intercepted conversation exists. And I have a couple of questions for you regarding this intercepted conversation.
Just before my friend does, I'm not sure whether the details the assertion he's making is one that can be found in the public record, but I'm happy to hear from him about that. I would urge him to refer to the summary, the topical summary on this issue.
I'm going to come to the topical summary, but if I could ask the Prime Minister generally, when were you first made aware that Mr. Dong had been having conversations with the PRC Consul General regarding the two Michaels?
I can't recall offhand at what point that was.
Do you remember what year, sir?
Perhaps there's documents that refer to the meeting that I can talk about publicly, the various briefings that I've had when these allegations came out. I believe this was the source, this was a matter disclosed in the leaks in the fall of 2022, and it was only subsequent to those leaks that I became aware of those conversations. So it would have been late in 2022.
You don't believe you were made aware of any such conversations prior to then?
No.
Okay. And could I ask that can some two be called up, please? And I believe Ms. Chowdhury took you through this document to some extent earlier. This is a summary of intelligence held by CSIS and the intelligence agencies relating to Han Dong and his communications with the People's Republic of China relating to the two Michaels. And I take it from your answers earlier, you reviewed this document in preparation for your testimony here today?
Yes.
And there's a summary of 5 points relating to this intelligence. Can you confirm, and I think you may have, that aside from your review of this particular document in preparation for today, you have received intelligence briefings and information that is reflected in each of these 5 points?
I have 6 points on mine.
I may have misspoken. You're correct, quite correct. 6 points.
Okay. Yes.
Okay. Can I turn your attention to point 4? Perhaps you can review that. And while you are, the second sentence says, MP Dong expressed the view that even if the PRC released the two Michaels at that moment, opposition parties would view the PRC's action as an affirmation of the effectiveness of a hardline Canadian approach to the PRC. See that?
Yes.
When were you first made aware of MP Dong expressing this view?
As I said, this was subsequent to leaks, but let me also just say that it's aware of information alleging that MP Dong expressed this view. As has been previously stated, there have been significant questions around both translation and summary of the actual exchange that, you know, I don't think I need to read the first page filled with caveats around incomplete, single-sourced, varying degrees of reliability, you know, not necessarily indicating corroboration or reliability of sources. So there's a lot of uncertainty around even the things that we're saying in the seeing in the summaries.
Can I ask you, Prime Minister, have you personally reviewed that summary?
This summary?
No, the summary of the intercepted conversation.
Madam Commissioner, I'm concerned that we're getting into a sensitive area. I'm frankly not sure. I'm not sure.
I can say yes to that, though. Yes, okay. I have personally done that. But there's not much more I can say about it.
That's fine, thank you. Can we call up COM 118, which is the Special Rapporteur's first report that was produced or dated May 23, 2023?
COM 118?
Yes.
Just a minute.
And I'd like to go to page 26, small Roman numeral 8. There's an analysis of a piece of reporting that Han Dong advised the PRC consulate to extend the detention of the two Michaels, Global News, March 22, 2023. Do you see that?
Yes.
Okay, and immediately below that, Mr. Johnston comments on how there has been considerable media attention about an alleged transcript of this conversation. You see that?
Yes.
And he then says, I have reviewed the same intelligence report that was provided to the Prime Minister relating to this allegation, which I am advised is the only intelligence that speaks to this issue. I can report the following, and we're going to come to the following. My question now, though, is, Mr. Johnson tells us that he reviewed the same intelligence report that you did, and that this is the only report that exists that speaks to this issue. So my question for you is the following. Is the intelligence report that Mr. Johnson is referring to there CAN-SUM 002 that we just looked at, or is it something else?
I'm not sure the witness can answer that in this setting.
So we'll note the question.
Okay. And are there other reports that, for now we'll go with written reports, either hard copy or electronic, that you're aware of that perhaps were not shared with Mr. Johnson that might relate to precisely what was or wasn't said between Mr. Dong and the PRC official?
I'm not certain I can answer that question.
For the same reasons?
For reasons of security and confidentiality.
Thank you.
National security.
Thank you. Have those reports, if there are any such reports, have they been provided to the present commission?
Again, I'm not sure I cannot confirm or infirm the existence of any other reports that I cannot speak to here.
Thank you very much. Mr. Johnson then gives his assessment of that particular allegation as follows. He says, the allegation is false. Mr. Dong discussed the two Michaels with a PRC official, but did not suggest to the official that the PRC extend their detention. The allegation that he did make that suggestion has had a very adverse effect. Do you agree with that assessment?
Yes, we know that the media reports and the allegations made in rather a spectacular fashion about Mr. Dong were false.
Okay, but would you agree
in regards
with
to what he said or didn't say about the two Michaels?
Okay, would you agree with me, sir, that all that Mr. Johnson was commenting on was what is contained in that heading, that particular allegation? Mr. Johnson didn't comment one way or the other about whether what else Mr. Dong might have said to the PRC counsel, read the two Michaels, was correct. So, for example, in CAN-SUM 02, the conversation is stated slightly differently.
I'm not sure the witness can comment on what Mr. Johnson was or was not commenting on.
Mr. Prime Minister, I have very many more questions, as you might imagine, but I simply don't have the time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. De Luca. Counsel for Anne Dong.
Thank you, Commissioner. Prime Minister, I'm Mark Pauly, and as you heard, I represent Han Dong. I'm going to start with the same issue that Mr. De Luca finished with, and that is the allegations that were made in the newspaper, in Global at least, relating to the two Michaels. And we, as you know, we heard yesterday from Mr. Clow, among others, and Mr. Clow told us about how after the leaks came out, there were discussions about what to do, how to respond, whether there could be any response. And in particular, he said there were a number of discussions about how to get the truth out that the story was wrong. And he explained that up until yesterday, he was not able to say that publicly. Are you able to, first of all, tell us, did you have conversations like that as well about whether there was anything the government could do, whether anything you could do?
Well, further, what we actually did was engage the special rapporteur who had the opportunity to go through the evidence and state quite categorically that the allegations were false. We felt that having the special rapporteur able to engage on that and qualify those allegations as false was perhaps more reassuring to concerned Canadians than having officials of the same, or the elected officials of the same party as Mr. Dong categorizing that the same way.
And so does that, well, aside from ultimately making that decision, did you, like Mr. Clow, have discussions about whether there was anything that could be released before that, like immediately to respond?
There were many discussions following the leaks on this issue, but on a number of the issues that were leaking, as we highlighted and attempted to highlight a few times in the media. There were clear falsehoods and inaccuracies in the media reporting, but the challenge of protecting national security meant that we were very much limited in our ability to contradict the false allegations being made by the leaker.
And that difficulty you're describing, although we've heard, as I say, Mr. Clow talk about finally being able to say something publicly yesterday, you're speaking about it today to some extent. But I take it that same tension continues, that there's only so much, as we can see, that you're able to say.
But given, as Mr. Clow pointed out yesterday, we are now in a position to express and to repeat that the way it was characterized in the media was wrong.
Okay. So let me turn to buses, the ongoing discussion about buses. We heard about you being briefed by Mr. Broadhurst in September 2019, and you talked about him flagging concerns and describing this scenario of students being brought to Don Valley North nomination meeting. And you asked whether the intelligence agency understood this thing that busing people to nomination meetings is standard, or I think you said regular earlier. Is that right?
Yes.
And
It will be your last question.
thank you. And you, sorry, let me make sure. And you raised the issue of whether the intelligence agency understood this basic issue that someone like you knows politics and nomination campaigns knows. And did you figure out an answer to that, whether the people at the agency who were reporting this had that context?
Oh, certainly. Listen, our intelligence agencies, even though they don't organize nomination meetings themselves as political parties do, regularly turn to experts and learn about the things that they don't know about when they need to. So I am very confident that our intelligence agencies now know a lot more about the unfolding of nominations, which is important because they need to be able to ensure that those nominations, like all electoral events, are decided by the residents, and indeed by ensuring that our democratic processes are free and fair and absent interference by foreign actors.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Human Rights Coalition.
My name is Sarah Teach, and as the Commissioner stated, I'm representing the Human Rights Coalition. I understand, Mr. Prime Minister, that you have a lot of confidence in your NSIA's ability to receive information from the national security agencies. But I want to ask about your level of confidence in the agency's abilities to receive information from those most vulnerable, namely members of targeted diaspora communities. So let me just start with this. Were you aware, Mr. Prime Minister, that the RCMP's National Security Information Network is only available in English and French?
I was not.
Were you aware that the CSE's online reporting tool, as well as CSIS's reporting tool, and the OCCE's complaints form on the website are also available in only English and French?
But I am also aware that all those agencies use in language individuals who are able to reach into and engage with communities. But I take your word for it that the online forms are only in English and French.
I appreciate that. And we also heard on March 27th with the diaspora panel, that was the first day of these hearings, that community members oftentimes don't feel empowered to reach out to the agencies. They feel that they won't be heard. They feel it's a waste of time for whatever reason. Given these limitations, how can you expect the agencies themselves to really know, and therefore how can you expect the NSAA to really know, if coercion, harassment, or intimidation of diaspora community members is happening, including in the context of elections?
This is certainly a challenge, and it is something that we've been working on over the past years to try and improve and increase not just the diversity within our various agencies, but also the ability of those agencies to reach into people who are often most vulnerable to interference, particularly in diaspora communities, but also at the same time, often with good reason, most suspicious of authorities and enforcement agencies that have not always treated them fairly in the past.
Thank you. Given these limitations, does this plant even a seed of doubt in your mind in terms of the integrity of the 2019 and 2021 general elections?
I think those are two different things. The challenge of any democracy is ensuring that people who perhaps disagree with the outcome of a given election still have faith that that is indeed the will of the people, the will of citizens. And that's where having a panel in place, both in 2019 and 2021, that could say that they have determined or they have concluded that the election was free and fair is a really important step. Now, nobody can say that about the 2015 election, for example, or elections before, because those panels didn't exist. At the same time, what we learned from the 2019 election was applied to the 2021 election and will continue to be applied and expanded and become more, perhaps more sensitive or alert to various vulnerabilities that are more difficult to go into, particularly when you talk about racialized or marginalized communities. So there is more to do, but I do have confidence in the ability of our intelligence agencies and our panel to have drawn the conclusion that the elections in 2019 and in 2021 were indeed free and fair.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Doody for the Ukrainian Canadian Congress? Or, yes. No, it's the Sikh Coalition, I'm sorry. You'll be next.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Trudeau. My name is Prabjot Singh. I'm appearing on behalf of the Sikh Coalition. So I don't have a whole lot of time, but I want to start by asking whether you would agree that your government missed key opportunities to hold India to account for its interference in Canada, and to be more specific, so we can narrow down a concise answer, that there were attempts made by the government to minimize the threat that India posed throughout this relevant period, and actually tried to hide the severity of the threat from Canadians. Would you agree with that assessment?
No.
Mr. Operator, if we can bring up COM 155. So, Mr. Trudeau, this is a copy of the 2019 annual report of the NSI COP, which you mentioned was a body created by your government in the hopes of creating some oversight and transparency on security and intelligence issues. Mr. Operator, if we can go to page 73 of the PDF. So as you know, this report deals with concerns about foreign interference. Is that 73 of the PDF? Or 55 of the actual document. And so this is a section that deals with foreign interference specifically. And if we can continue to scroll down until 79, please. You can go a little bit faster. And stop right there, if you can hold for a second. If you scroll up, please. So there is mention specifically of foreign interference by the People's Republic of China, and continue scrolling. There's mention of the Russian Federation, and if we can pause right there, and it specifically says other states engaged in foreign interference, and if you continue scrolling, that entire section has been redacted. Mr. Operator, if we can go to page 108 of the PDF. And if you continue scrolling until 113, you see these are instances of Canada's response to foreign interference in relation to China. And then it goes into instances of a response to Russian interference. And if we scroll down, and this entire section again is redacted. So Mr. Trudeau, I'm going to suggest that the redacted sections of this report outline details of Indian electoral interference and coercive activities against the Sikh community, as well as outlining governmental failures in combating this specific threat. And so I understand that you may not be able to address this in a public setting for national security reasons. And if that's the case, you can indicate that to the commissioner. So can you confirm that that is the substance that's been redacted in this report?
Obviously, in a public setting, I can't speak to redactions made for national security, but I will say that the principle that anyone who comes to Canada from anywhere in the world has all the rights of a Canadian to be free from extortion, coercion, interference from a country that they left behind. And how we have stood up for Canadians, including in the very serious case that I brought forward to Parliament of the killing of Nijar, demonstrates our government's commitment to defending the rights and freedoms of Canadians, for whom, which are the reasons for which so many people crossed oceans and continents to come live in this country and build this country. And the suggestion that we haven't and we won't do everything we can to defend Canadian rules and values and defend Canadians from foreign interference is simply misplaced.
And so I take your point there, and I have very limited time, but I do want to confirm that it was you that approved the redactions in this report. Is that correct? Based on suggestions from public servants that you received.
Redactions are made by professional public servants, and we sign off on them, but we do not modify them.
But you do have the authority, the ultimate approval, and you do have the possibility to push back against excessive redactions.
Redactions are made by professional public servants, not by the political wing.
And does the Prime Minister have the authority to push back on the suggestions that are made in cases where there may be excessive redactions? That
gets into the entire question of declassification of information, and in the American system, the president can, declassify in ways that are not replicated in our system here in Canada.
So just very simply, I have one last question I want to ask after this. Does the Prime Minister have the authority and the ability to push back against those suggestions when there's excessive redaction?
The Prime Minister has an ability to engage in discussions and ask for reasons. But like I said, as Prime Minister and as a government, our habit and our approach has always been to allow the professional public service to make determinations around what needs to be redacted in the name of national security and confidentiality.
Madam Commissioner, I have one final question, if that's okay.
Very quick.
Sure. I think you would agree that the lack of meaningful steps to expose and stop foreign interference activities when they first arise, including deliberate actions to redact any failures that may have been included in the NSI COP report, could play a role in India's increasingly aggressive interference and repression activities over this period. So that would be a consequence of failing to act effectively and failing to bring the threat of Indian foreign interference to Canadians' attention earlier. Is that correct?
I think that's certainly a question one needs to ask of the previous Conservative government that was known for its very cozy relationship with the current Indian government, whereas our government has always stood up to defend the minorities in Canada and the rights of minorities to speak out, even if it irritates their home countries overseas.
Thank you. Those are all my questions.
So, Mr. Doody, it's your turn.
Good evening, Prime Minister. It's John Doody. I'm counsel for the Ukrainian-Canadian Congress. We've heard that Russia's foreign interference activities in foreign elections was the catalyst for the plan to protect Canada's democracy, and that Russia was a foreign nation that the Canadian government was concerned could potentially interfere in Canadian elections, correct?
Yes.
Okay. We've also heard from the site task force and the panel of 5 that neither identified any foreign interference activity by Russia in either the 2019 or the 21 general election. It would seem possible that Russia was not interested in interfering with Canadian elections in those years, or equally possible that they did and the Canadian government failed to detect it. Would you agree that it's possible that Russia interfered in one or both the elections and the Canadian government simply failed to notice it?
I would highlight that, of course, it is always possible that the entire body of our national security intelligence agencies, our very sophisticated cyber and security communications establishment, detected absolutely nothing or got it wrong. But I would also suggest that undermining Canadians' confidence in their elections being free and fair is probably something that Russia would love to see in Canada. So I would be very wary about saying that, oh, you know, despite the fact you didn't find any evidence of it, it still might have happened. I think we have seen the extent to which Russia is engaged in misinformation, disinformation, and actions of sowing chaos and destabilizing democracies around the world, including attempts at cyber attacks and successful cyber attacks in Canada. But I think one of the big differences between Russia and a number of other hostile or challenging state actors is the significant lack of a critical mass of either Russian diaspora or Russian speakers in Canada, as you contrast with the situation in Ukraine or in Latvia or elsewhere, where there is an easier threshold for them to interfere in democratic processes.
You spoke about the need for Canadians to be confident that the government is doing what it can to keep Canadians safe. How confident are you in the site task force and the panel of 5's conclusion that Russia did not interfere with either election?
We know Russia is responsible for significant amounts of propaganda, of misinformation, of disinformation, and certainly attempts at interference are no doubt, ongoing from Russia. They are a hostile actor, hostile to Canada, hostile to our values, hostile to our support of Ukraine, and hostile to our democracy. But to reach a threshold at which there is a belief that Russia posed a threat to the integrity of our elections, to the outcome of our elections, is certainly not something that either the site or the panel determined.
And finally, would you expect members of the Canadian-Ukrainian community to have a high level of confidence in that conclusion as well?
Yes, I think the Canadian-Ukrainian community, like all Canadians, can have a high degree of confidence in the conclusions by all of our national security experts and top public servants that the elections in 2019 and 2021 are free and fair. At the same time, I think Ukrainian Canadians, like all Canadians, need to remain vigilant to Russian disinformation and to the amplification of pro-Russian narratives in contexts and coming from places that one wouldn't suspect pro-Russian narratives to be amplified. I'm very pleased to see that Ukraine just passed the updated Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement over the past days, and I continue to be bewildered at the fact that the Conservative Party voted against that update because they fell prey to pro-Russian narratives that are undermining Canada's support for Ukraine amongst Conservative Canadians, which I know is a thing of deep distress for many Ukrainian Canadians, and rightly so.
Thank you, Prime Minister.
Metzirois for the RCDA. Russian-Canadian Democratic Alliance.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Premier ministre. Bonjour, Madame la Commissaire. Guillaume Sirois, avocat pour l'Alliance démocratique des Canadiens russes. On a entendu un témoignage à l'effet qu'une certaine campagne de désinformation pouvait avoir coûté quelques sièges à un certain parti politique lors de l'élection de 2021. Je pense que vous savez de quoi je fais référence. Mais j'aimerais dépolitiser l'enjeu, si possible, pour parler plus de désinformation.
Sauf que la conclusion a été de nos experts en sécurité nationale et du panel chargé d'assurer l'intégrité de nos élections qu'il n'y a eu aucun impact de l'ingérence étrangère dans les résultats, que ce soit au niveau des 338 comtés ou au niveau de l'élection générale. Donc, oui, il y a eu des attentats d'ingérence, mais nos élections ont demeuré intègres dans leurs résultats.
Ma question, c'est est-ce que ce genre de tentative-là affecte seulement un seul parti ou un seul chef de parti, ou elles peuvent affecter des partis de toutes les couleurs ou des chefs de partis de toutes les couleurs, dont le Parti libéral du Canada?
Certainement, l'engagement ou de l'ingérence étrangère pourrait affecter juste un parti ou tous les partis ou différents partis selon non seulement le pays, mais le pays d'origine, mais aussi le comté, la région dans laquelle il se trouve.
Et est-ce que c'est quelque chose que vous avez témoigné en tant que premier ministre lors des élections en tant que chef du Parti libéral, pardon, lors des élections de 2019 ou de 2021?
En termes de chef de parti, moi, ma job, c'était de faire campagne, de parler au plus de Canadiens possible et de faire élire le plus de libéraux possible. Je me fiais aux institutions qu'on a bâties, le Site Task Force, le P5 Panel, pour s'assurer que l'intégrité des élections tienne. Et effectivement, ils ont conclu dans les élections de 2019 et 2021 que les élections ont été libres et justes.
J'aimerais mettre de côté un peu l'institution pour l'instant, mais vraiment vous poser la question en tant que chef de parti qui fait la campagne électorale en 2019-2021, puis savoir qu'est-ce que vous avez vu ou entendu de vos propres yeux et oreilles. Est-ce que c'est des choses comme des campagnes de désinformation visant les libéraux ou vous-même, en tant que chef de parti, c'est quelque chose que vous avez entendu ou vu pendant l'une ou l'autre des campagnes électorales?
Des campagnes de désinformation, on en a vu énormément, plus en 2021 qu'en 2019, mais que ce soit au niveau des théories de complot par rapport à la vaccination, que ce soit au niveau des théories de complot par rapport au Forum économique mondial ou d'autres, ou des attaques personnelles contre moi et ma famille. Oui, il y a eu de la mésinformation et de la désinformation pendant ces campagnes-là.
Mais ça doit pas être une situation super facile, surtout quand ça touche la famille. Mais ma question, c'est concernant, vous connaissez la puissance des médias sociaux, évidemment. Vous avez fait la campagne en 2015 grâce aux médias sociaux, justement. Ça vous a certainement aidé dans cette campagne-là. Je me demande, est-ce que vous pensez que les campagnes de désinformation que vous dites qui semblaient être importantes en 2019-2021, pensez-vous que ça a eu un effet sur les électeurs lors de ces campagnes électorales?
Bien, tous les partis politiques utilisaient des médias sociaux comme moyen d'aller chercher des votes et chercher des électeurs. Donc, certainement, les médias sociaux ont joué un rôle important dans ces deux élections-là.
Je parle des campagnes de désinformation spécifiquement. Pensez-vous que celles-ci ont pu influencer la décision de certains électeurs?
Bien, je pense qu'on voit que la mésinformation et la désinformation a un impact sur énormément de gens. Les milliers de Canadiens qui croyaient que la vaccination était plus dangereuse que la maladie de COVID-19 elle-même sont un exemple de gens qui ont été affectés, des fois de façon mortelle, fatale, par la désinformation.
Votre dernière question, M. Roy.
Il me reste encore 30 secondes, mais oui, je vais poser... Ma question, c'est, si vous avez témoigné des campagnes de désinformation qui pouvaient potentiellement influencer des électeurs, pourquoi vous n'avez pas soulevé cette question-là avec les organismes, les institutions, justement, du gouvernement qui sont mandatés pour agir sur ces campagnes de désinformation-là ou lorsqu'il y a des atteintes à l'intégrité des élections?
Parce que ces institutions-là, et au contraire, j'en parle régulièrement avec mes conseillers en sécurité nationale de l'impact de la désinformation, de la mésinformation. Je sais regarder la situation des convois à Ottawa et d'autres pour savoir que ça a un impact réel. Mais c'est pas à moi de dire au panel qu'il faut veiller contre la mésinformation, la désinformation. Ça fait partie de leur job pour s'assurer de l'intégrité des élections. C'est une job qu'ils ont bien fait en 2019-2021, mais on reconnaît qu'en 2025, ça va être encore plus difficile et ils vont devoir faire continuer leur excellent travail.
Donc, juste ma dernière question, s'il vous plaît, Madame la Commissaire. Si vous, en tant que chef de parti qui fait la campagne, remarquez des campagnes de désinformation sérieuses lors des élections, vous pensez que ce n'est pas nécessaire de rapporter ça au Site Task Force, au panel des 5, en tant que chef du Parti libéral, parce que vous avez confiance qu'ils font leur travail?
Non. Si j'ai bloqué ça, j'ai confiance que ils vont faire leur travail, mais ça fait partie de notre responsabilité à tous, qu'on soit citoyen, qu'on soit candidat, qu'on soit chef de parti ou parti politique, de travailler avec le panel, avec le Site Task Force pour souligner de la mésinformation et de la désinformation. Ça fait partie de ce qu'on va faire en travaillant avec les panels pour soulever des enjeux, mais le panel ne dépend pas de nous pour faire leur travail non plus. Mais oui, on peut absolument participer et on devrait.
Merci.
Merci. Du côté du procureur général du Canada?
Nothing from the Attorney General. Thank you very much, Madam
Nothing.
Commissioner.
Re-examination?
No, thank you, Commissioner.
Merci beaucoup.
Merci,
Alors,
Madame
je ne
la
sais pas
Commissaire.
si je dois dire que vous êtes libre de quitter, mais je vais me permettre de vous le dire, que vous êtes libre de quitter.
Merci beaucoup, Madame.
Order, please. Alors, s'il vous plaît, this sitting of the Foreign Interference Commission has adjourned. Cette séance de la Commission sur l'ingérence étrangère est levée.